Welcome to the Multifamily Investor Nation podcast. I'm your host, Dan Hanford. Really excited to have our guest here with us today. We have Johnny Lynum. Johnny, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Dan. Glad to be here today.
I want you to get us started. And before we dive into this 18-unit property that you bought almost a year ago now, back in June of 2020, out of Panama City, Florida, called Lenawee Street Apartments. Before we dive into that one, why don't you tell the listeners a little about yourself and your background and where you are right now as far as the multifamily space is concerned?
Awesome. For me, like a lot of people, I started on the single family side. I'm a 15-year active duty Air Force veteran, still active duty. And along the way, started using my VA loan, buying homes and moving around the country and keeping them as rental property. And back in around 2015, my wife and I, we started a fix and flip business, essentially, where we started buying and selling homes virtually in Birmingham, Alabama, after we did our first project in Northern Virginia. And after Hurricane Michael in 2018 hit the Panama City, Florida area, it presented a unique opportunity where there were a lot of dilapidated houses available on the market and homeowners that needed to sell as is. And it was a perfect timing for us. And essentially, it helped us kind of build the skill set over time. And when I went to my first multifamily conference late 2018, it opened my eyes to how close we actually were to being able to buy apartments, which always was at the back of my mind of what I wanted to get to. But I just thought that the cost was going to be a large barrier before we would be able to cross over into that asset class.
Well, good. Great to hear your background, your story there. Looking forward to hearing more about this acquisition. And let's go ahead and dive into it. And let's talk about the acquisition side of it. So how did you originally find and source this deal?
Yep. So found it had stalled on the MLS. I was preparing for an appraisal for one of our duplexes. And it was a commercial lot, and the lot behind us was for sale. And so I went on MLS to actually see what the list price was so I could see what they were trying to sell the land for. In order to prepare my report for my appraisals that I always do. And I found it. It was a 18 unit. It was listed for 1.35 million, and it had been over the MLS for over 90 days. And this was about 45 days after going to my first multifamily conference that I mentioned. And it just kind of opened my eyes. So I knew about the process, about LOIs, doing my underwriting. I had my new multifamily calculator that I had picked up from the conference and had been studying a lot of the metrics and how to go through and actually underwrite the deal.
So originally 1.35 million is what it was listed at. And did you first look at this in 2018?
Yeah, so I found it in December of 2019.
2019.
Yeah, 2019.
December of 2019, 1.35 million. What did you end up getting it under contract for?
We got it under contract for $1,050,000.
Okay. And what did you do to be able to kind of negotiate with this seller to get them to come off by $300,000 off their asking price?
Well, the unique thing with this property, it was a mom and pop owner, and they were in the middle of an insurance claim. So a little bit over 50% of the units had been turned over, but there was one building that was down to the studs in two of the four units. And it was continuing to stall out. And that was one of the big underpinning things that was their motivation. They actually had other businesses. It was two couples that owned it. And so it wasn't their number one priority. And it had dragged out for almost over a year at that point. And we came in with $1 million offer with our LOI and was working with the broker. It took us 3 months to get under contract. But I think over that time, the more and more time and working with the insurance in that battle, that it actually helped them to motivate them to come off their price and to see kind of closer where the market was at on where it actually would sell for.
How many round of offers did you have with the seller?
Just one. They wanted to be at 1.1 when we initially submitted that $1 million LOI. And they did have a broker and was working with the broker, and we ended up splitting the difference there after probably about 45 days after I walked the property in mid-January.
Okay. And so you got it under contract in, say, March? Was that
early March?
So now we all know what happened in March of 2020. So I'm sure we'll have some interesting things to talk about there. But when you were first getting this deal under contract in March, knowing what was starting, or maybe not even knowing what was starting to happen with the economy and the pandemic and things like that, what was going through your brain at that time?
It was nerve wracking, because there was a lot of unknowns. Every day the news was getting worse and worse. The numbers are getting higher. More things are shutting down. And I try not to watch the news as much, just with the normal rhetoric, because they put their spin on it. But I knew there were some things happening just with the nature of my job and everything with the military. That, hey, we got to start planning for these things when you're in a leadership position. And so it was nerve wracking, but at the same time, we had a fix and flip that we were working on the single family side. And I had a good relationship with the lender, a local credit union, who said, hey, he would keep me abreast of, like, hey, right now, nothing's changing with us. We're moving full steam ahead. We had got the finance, and I had brought the deal after I walked it in January, and brought it to him to kind of get ahead of the game with getting the contract, to kind of see, hey, what the terms that they would have, and it would be something that they would look to fund, which I kind of had that head nod before. And so once we got under contract, it was a matter of, okay, let's go ahead and put everything together, underwrite, and get it to the committee for approval.
So walk us through the contract here as well. Like, what were some of the terms in there as far as due diligence and earnest money deposit and various things like that?
Yep. So we had a 1% earnest money deposit upfront, and we had a 30-day due diligence period that didn't start until they turned over all the documents, which it took about a week after we went under contract to kind of get all the financials to go through. And from there, we knew ahead of time that there was a water leak. And so in the contract, we actually included that the seller was going to repair the water main leak there, which the water was bubbling up in the middle of the street. And it was a back and forth with the city. And so that work actually didn't even get accomplished till late May timeframe. So it pushed the closing out. It pushed us to get an extension. And they ended up paying the $30,000 bill to get that repaired before we closed.
So let's kind of go straight into the due diligence here and talk to us a little about what are some things that came up during the due diligence process.
A lot of it. So when I walked in January, I had walked the property with my lead contractor. So from that standpoint, we kind of knew we had all new roofs. We knew that the HVACs and the water heaters were kind of a mixed bag. Those systems were kind of all over the place, from being replaced a couple years ago to some that were over 10 years old. So we knew we had some deferred maintenance in those areas. But 10 of the 18 units had already been turned over post the hurricane. So we had new vinyl plank flooring, had new kitchen cabinets, fresh paint fixtures, all new roofs on all the buildings. And so 10 of them we knew were pretty solid. We had one unit that we actually did a assignment of benefits as part of the closing, where we took over the claim. The unique thing with this, the property is comprised of 4 quadruplexes and 1 duplex. And this owner had a separate insurance policy for each building. And so the C building was down with two units down to the studs, and the other one's kind of halfway. And so we took over the insurance claim in order to bring on the proceeds to renovate those. And then one building was left that didn't have a lot of damage from the hurricane. And so had a lot of original carpet paint, cabinetry in those 4 units. So we kind of knew going in what we were walking into. The formal inspection didn't really bring up any major red flags that we didn't already know from just walking the units up front.
So speaking of this hurricane, obviously a hurricane came through, affected the property. There's an insurance claim on it. What did that do to the insurance costs on this property?
The cost, we went in to get insured. It was kind of on par with working with our broker that we normally work with on the single family side. With the cost did go up. I think he said it was about 15%. The next year, kind of before Hurricane Michael had impacted the area. And right now, we're coming up on the 1-year mark, and our premium did go up from roughly around $8,700 to a little bit north of $10,000. So we did see an increase after this first year, and getting a couple of estimates now on that front. So we kind of had that cost bounded up front with kind of what to expect on the insurance side of things. And but going to a going to a real estate investor meeting, I had found another investor in the area who was taking over claims as part of the single family process with buying houses and just taking over the existing insurance claim. And so that strategy helped us out tremendously, whereas that it actually, in this case, we got $41,000 to the bill back for the renovations, and then $10,150 in rent loss that came with the policy. So it helped out a lot by just knowing that strategy, that you can take over an existing claim when you buy a property.
And did you know about that claim and have it assigned at the PSA, or was that during your due diligence that you had to ask for the seller to get that assigned to you?
Yep, that was part of the back and forth because we knew that the claim was a messy claim that had kind of delayed, and that was the underlying motivation. And I knew already that, hey, that we could take that on. And so that was something I worked with the broker that, hey, that all that would transfer with the property upon closing.
Okay. So what was the going in cap rate on this purchase price?
So I underwrote it at 10, and we ended up with the $1,050,000 that at least the appraiser underwrote it at a 9 cap.
Okay.
We got our appraisal.
And what did the appraisal come back at?
As is was at 1.22 million, and after renovation they had it at 1.34.
Okay. Now talk to me about the rents here. What were the current in place and effective rents?
So it was across the board. So the legacy units were a mix from 625 to 750 in the B unit, but those that had been renovated were at 875, and we had 2 that were actually at 925. Just with a natural disaster that size in that area, housing supply was at a premium, and so those units had kind of fluctuated where there wasn't a lot of competition, and so they were able to actually get a little bit higher on some of the units once they got those leased out and they were turned over. And right now we have a couple of renewals coming up, and my property manager is actually asking, they want to go up to 950, in which our underwriting, we were, even though we were 875, we wanted to be conservative at 850 when we went in originally with the underwriting. And so now we're seeing about $100 more in the market.
And are these all 2.2s?
2.1s.
2.1s,
about 750 square feet.
Okay. That's a pretty good per square foot cost right there. So what your plan is on this one? Well, I won't talk about your plan. I'll have you share your plan. What's the actual plan on this property based on what the current rents are, what the plan is to get them to the 925 to 950 mark, and kind of what's the timeline there?
For me, it's a long-term hold. It was a long-term hold from day one. That was my plan. I'm big on cash flow and just the whole passive investing piece, that I see this as part of my long-term retirement and just kind of building generational wealth. And so knowing that going in, originally I was going in and say, hey, can we take this down by ourselves? And around the same time in March, I joined my first mastermind group and was talking about the deal. And I had entertained partnering with one other person kind of going into it originally. And they kind of had some setbacks with the stock market tanking around the March, April timeframe. And then just with the nature of their business and things shutting down, they were like, hey, yeah, I can't really move into this type of venture right now. And I had a guy in my mastermind group that said, hey, I want to be a GP. Do you mind if I raise some money and jump and get part of your deal and get that experience? And it worked out well. And he actually brought in 75,000 that 40 of it was his. And he raised 35K to come on board. And the bank was fine with it. They were, as long as I had 5% my own capital into it, they were fine with doing a loan and having a second position, because when I went to the multifamily conference, I had got a book from Kim Taylor and just talking about how to legally raise private capital. And she had a section in there about promissory notes. And so I went the course of, hey, let's just raise 2-year notes with the 7% annual return. We'll give them a quarterly payment, and then we'll kick in 20% equity on the back end when we refinance at the 2-year mark. And we put a 1-year extension clause in there as well too, if we need to push it out a little bit longer. And it worked out.
So you're basically giving out a 7% return paid out quarterly. And then at the 2-year mark, you can either extend it for another year, or you could do a refinance and give them a 20% kicker on it and then get them out.
Yep. Correct. And so it worked out pretty good. I'm a 77% owner. My GP, Roy Compton, came in. He's 18% owner. And then one of my college buddies came in and put 20K in the deal, and he's a 5% owner.
That's interesting. So what was the total equity check on this one?
95K. So raised 95K, and then I had to bring 110K in personally on my side.
So you raised 95K and then 100K on your own.
Yep.
Okay. And how have things been going since you took over the property? That's now been a year. So talk to us about how well you've been able to execute on this business plan.
Yeah, so it's been a roller coaster. I think roller coaster is a great term for it. I knew I had to leave the area and be relocated with my next assignment at the end of 2020. Excuse me, end of 2020. And so I took on the task of being the not on site property manager, but being the property manager for 6 months. I was like, okay, I can do it for 6 months. I want to get this experience of kind of being hands on with the property. And it worked out well, especially during COVID. Working hand in hand with tenants and kind of understanding. I come from humble beginnings, and so I don't have a problem resonating. I grew up living in an apartment, and so just because we're in the people business, with dealing with tenants and tenant issues, we had a couple of people lose jobs due to COVID, had some setbacks, and so it was really working with people and helping kind of getting that boots on the ground experience and going through that. It was a good experience. It was some up and downs dealing with people and just the complaints with people, tenants not getting along. And now we have a third party property manager. After we left, we handed over the keys. That was probably the best day ever when I handed over the box of keys to the units, to the property management company to deal with that. But overall, it was a positive experience. We just here recently, last few weeks, got the check from the insurance company for the claim. So almost a year later, we were still going through the claim process. It really came down to the mold remediation company. They came in before the insurance company came in and demoed cabinets out of the unit, out of the kitchen. They were like, well, this probably wouldn't affect it. And so it was a whole lot of back and forth. What had water damage? What didn't have water damage? Why did you take it out? And nobody had pictures of it. So, getting engineering reports, going back and forth. But in the end, it all worked out and we had to be patient. And I had to go through in my own house and dealt with the insurance claim that went well over a year. And so I was kind of ready for it, but I wasn't ready for it to go that long. And so it definitely impacted our cash flow with us only being at 78% occupancy, physical occupancy with those 4 units down, that we felt it on the cash flow, which was fine. We had $25,000 in concessions from the seller at closing just because however the claim worked out. We knew it was deferred maintenance, but then also if the insurance claim actually came in a little bit less than what we needed, then we had a little cushion there, and they were definitely amenable with that, with helping us on that. So it worked out. The first year, didn't cash flow as much as we wanted it to, but we're positioned for the long term.
Did the lender require any COVID reserves back in June of last year?
They did not. I had heard that, just listen to podcasts and what's going on with a lot of the Fannie Freddie loans, but they didn't. And that was one of the things that was surprising, was just how easy they were to work with them keeping a loan in house, that their process is a whole lot different, even more so, I would say a lot less stringent than getting a single family home.
Yeah. And let's walk through the financing at this point. You mentioned using I think you said a local bank there, but walk us through kind of what you did from a financing perspective and some of the terms that they gave you.
Yep. So we ended up with a 4% interest rate. It was a 25-year amortization, 15-year term with the interest rate resetting every 5 years to prime rate plus 3/4 of a point.
So kind of a semi-floating rate.
Yep. Semi-floating rate. And we had to put 20% down, so 80% LTV.
And did you raise any money, or did you plan for any CapEx projects outside of the insurance money?
We did not.
And we did not. We know that we project the need to do any of that.
Well, with the systems, we knew that we'd probably have to replace. We didn't have to replace the HVAC unit over the last year, but we did end up replacing 2 water heaters over time and just some other deferred maintenance. One of the big ones that just came up last month, we had a $3,000 expense for a leaking bathtub. That tub needed to be replaced. And so that's one of the things that we're actually going to do on the 4 units that are down now, that we're actually going to just go through and replace those tubs. Whereas that they probably should have been replaced when they built the units back, but they didn't. And just to get ahead of that, instead of having to tear out sheetrock and move things around to get behind the kitchen cabinets, then we just go ahead and replace the tub now, so we don't have to worry about that expense in the next 5 years at any time. So since they are aged, because I think the property was built in 85.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And can you think of anything else during this acquisition that might be interesting for us to talk about or uncover or unpack a little bit that might be valuable for the listener?
No, I think the biggest thing, the water piece, that delayed us a little bit. And really it was just the communication with the broker and understanding it was a lot of back and forth. The owner was hands off a lot. And so they were fine with me picking the vendor. So I had to find somebody to come in that does the water work. We had to get permits, had to work with the city. And so I had to orchestrate all that, which I was fine with, with putting the work in. But because I wanted the deal to close, and I know I cared about it, but it was a lot working with the city hand to hand, kind of understanding how they did the permitting and getting the company there. So it worked out. It was a little bit atypical, but we had to go through it and work it to get the deal done. And we wanted to make sure, because they wanted to say, hey, we just give you the money and you do it after closing. And I was like, no, we want to make sure this is done, put in place, and kind of limit that risk up front before we take ownership.
Because you never really know sometimes how much that kind of stuff is going to cost.
Right.
Well, I got two final questions for you, Johnny, as we're wrapping up the episode here, and they're kind of contrasting questions. And the first one is, what did you find that was kind of easier during this entire process that maybe originally you thought was going to be a little bit more challenging?
I think definitely the loan process, having that relationship with the bank up front and going through that process with them, it was totally easy. They already had my real estate schedule. They knew they had my profile already for one of the portfolio loans we had done before with a few single families. And so it was good having that relationship up front in place, whereas that it was just streamlined and straightforward, and whereas that the financing was ready to go. By the end of April, they were ready to go and ready to close. But because of the water work and everything, we ended up slipping out almost another additional 60 days. And for me, it was nerve wracking because COVID was getting worse and worse and worse. And I'm like, okay, are they going to come back and like, hey, we're stopping our loans. We're going to see what's going on with everything and kind of take a pause. And then I'm like, what are we going to do at that point? If, because we're all in and committed with them. And so thankfully, it was a blessing that it worked out and they stood fast and it never skipped a beat throughout the pandemic.
So the last question is kind of the opposite of that. What did you find that was more challenging that originally you thought was going to be kind of a walk in the park, if you will?
Definitely the property management piece. Coming in single family, but it was a different beast all around. And even after handing over to the property management company, just dealing with angry tenants that just wanted to walk out the property, and they didn't like that they weren't paying and got a judgment against them, and then they didn't want to pay. And then they came after me. So, personally, whereas I had left the area and everything, on social media and, calling my job, calling 3 or 4 different Air Force bases, hunting me down to talk to my supervisor, just, thinking that I personally wronged them. And so from that perspective that it comes with the territory. I wasn't expecting that. But I've heard, those horror stories of, professional tenants and the challenges with that. So it was good, looking back on it, survived it as usual and just keep ticking. But it definitely gave me a newfound respect for property managers, no doubt.
Yeah, it's one of the reasons why it's good to have a layer between you and the residents, and that's what that property management is there for.
Yes.
Well, Johnny, I want to thank you so much for taking some time to be here with us today. You've been great. I actually learned a lot myself on this episode. I know our listeners will as well. Looking forward to continuing to follow you. How can the listeners reach you if they have further questions about this acquisition, or maybe they want to follow you more?
Sure. My website, Op Invest Now, my company there, Operation Invest, just working to educate more investors that's looking on both the single family and multifamily side of things. And then also just with raising capital to people, helping people get into deals to kind of create more passive income and generational wealth. And on LinkedIn, Johnny Lynum, and Instagram, Mr. Operation Restore.
Awesome. Again, thank you so much, Johnny. Looking forward to following you on this particular property here, but also continuing to look forward to seeing you close more deals. And as you do, love to have you back on the podcast.
Awesome. Thank you, Dan, for the opportunity, and looking forward to coming back in the future.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Johnny.
Yep.